Now that we've used tidyr to clean up our dataset, let's return to using Dplyr. Now that we've created new variables for each indicator, we can more easily view important sections of our dataset. So, for instance, if we want to use the filter function to view the location surveyed in 2015 who reported more than 10% of women being tested for malaria, we can do so with the filter function from Dplyr. So again, let's start off by specifying the dataset that we want to use, H, the subset that we just created with tidyr, then filtering by year being 2015, and the percent of women tested for malaria, and specifically the percentage of women being tested for malaria being greater than 10%. So now we can create this table, and it contains information for surveys that were conducted in 2015 who reported having more than 10% of women in that location being tested for malaria. Now let's move on to the select function. Now select can be used to view only the columns for location, year, and tobacco use. So again, let's specify our H as our dataset that we're going to be using. So H, then we want to select the columns named location, year, and tobacco. The table that we just created has 22,041 rows and 3 columns. This all contains information on women who use tobacco. Now if we return to our example for combining filter and select, we can view only locations where the percentage of females who use contraceptives is greater than 20. So again, let's specify H as our data set, and then select the columns named location, year, and contraceptive use. And then we can filter contraception so that it only includes data that's greater than 20%. The percentage of women who use contraceptives is greater than 20%. So now the table created has 632 rows and 3 columns, the columns being location, year, and contraceptive use. And now this only includes surveys that reported having more than 20% of women using contraceptives. Now, as you can see, by running this line of code, it does not matter whether you use select or filter first in your line of code. You can use them interchangeably and it will produce the same table. Now we can return to using the arrange function. So for example, if we want to sort location by the percentage of women who gave birth in an institution and sort this from lowest to highest percentage of women, we can again specify H as our data set and then select the columns named location, year, and institutional delivery, and then arrange these columns by institutional delivery. Perfect. Now we have a table with 22,041 rows and 3 columns, the columns being location, year, and institutional delivery. And we can see from the first row that Bangladesh in 1993 in this specific survey only had 2% of women having birth in an institution. Now arrange, similarly to select and filter, it does not matter the order in which you use arrange and select, as evidenced by the table created when you switch arrange and select. Now we can return to another example. If we want to sort location by the percentage of women who had a skilled attendant for her institutional delivery, and now sort this from highest to lowest percentage, we can do so by, again, stating that we want the H data set, and then selecting for the columns location, year, delivery, attendant, institution, and then arrange with DESC added in the arrange command to sort from descending order. And now this is sorting with delivery attendant in an institution. So now we can see from the table created with dimensions 22,041 rows and 3 columns, the columns being location, year, and the percentage of women who had a skilled attendant for her institutional delivery that Albania had in 2008 for this survey, had 100% of women report that they had a skilled attendant for their institutional delivery. Now, a new function that I mentioned earlier in the tidyr introduction, this is mutate, and now mutate allows you to add new variables to a data set. So for example, you can create a new variable that shows a ratio of the percentage of children who use mosquito nets to the percentage of women who use mosquito nets. So now if we want to do this in original R, we can do so by creating a new subset. So this subset has all of the rows and columns of our H subset. I just created a new subset so that we could keep track of the ratio variable. And now that we've created this new subset, we can create a new variable in the subset, the variable being a ratio of the net children to net women. Again, this stands for the percentage of children who use mosquito nets to the percentage of women who use mosquito nets. So let's run this line of code. And now we can say the HRAT, which is the H data set, where all of the rows are included and the location, net women, net children, and ratio columns are printed. So now we have a tibble with dimensions 22,041 rows and 4 columns, the columns being location, the percentage of women using mosquito nets, the percentage of children using mosquito nets, and the ratio of children to women using mosquito nets. Now to do this more cleanly in Dplyr, we can again specify that we want the H dataset, and then we want to select the columns location, net.women, and net.children, and then we can use mutate, the new function in Dplyr, to create a new variable named ratio, and ratio is going to equal the column net.children divided by the column net.women. So this will create the same exact tibble, again with dimensions 22,041 rows and 4 columns, including location, the percentage of women using mosquito nets, the percentage of children using mosquito nets, and the ratio of children to women using mosquito nets in Dplyr. And again, this is just more cleanly written, and it's just a better way of presenting the information so that you don't need to first create a new subset, create a new variable in that subset, and then view only the columns of interest. You can instead view your original data set with a subset of the columns and then using mutate to create a new variable within that. So note the order of operations matters when using the verb mutate. Notice the variable ratio would not print in this scenario. So if instead we state the H data set and then mutate, creating a new variable called ratio, and that new variable ratio having the net children to the net women, and then selecting the columns location, net.women, and net.children, this would not work. The tibble created would only have location, net.women, net.children, and not include the newly created ratio variable because ratio wouldn't be included in this select column function. So we would need to then write it in. And we can write it in. And once we do that, our tibble looks the same as before. Okay, now we're going to talk about the function summarize. So summarize allows you to compute a summary statistics, such as a mean, for each group in a data set. So for example, it allows you to compute the average percent of women surveyed in each location who use tobacco. Originally in R, we could start by creating a new subset, H_sum, with all of the H data set, all of the rows and columns. I wanted to do this mainly so that we wouldn't ruin our H data set that we've been using throughout this tutorial. So we start by saying head and then using the function with, specifying the dataset H_sum, using the function tapply, using tobacco as the percentage of women who use tobacco, per location, and then computing the mean and removing all NA values. And then we want to aggregate this and print 4 rows. So when we do this, our printout, we have location and tobacco, and we can read this as, in Afghanistan, from all of the surveys conducted in Afghanistan, 3.6% of women on average reported to using tobacco. So now we can do this a bit more simply in Dplyr using the summarize function. So again, let's start off by stating the data set that we wish to use. So this is H, and then group by location. Again, this just means that we want to, for each survey location, we want to compute one mean. So then we can use the summarize function and create a new variable. I named this AVG_TOB for the average tobacco use, and then compute the mean tobacco use and remove all NA values, and then print 4 rows. So now when we do this, we have a tibble with dimensions 93 rows by 2 columns, and we have location and average tobacco use. Now note the order of operations matters when using the verb summarize. Notice the variable location would not exist. In this case, we would be calculating a single mean value for the percentage of women surveyed who use tobacco. So if we say the H data set and we want to summarize average tobacco use and then group by location, we would get an error because location does not exist in this scenario. Now to use group by. So let's talk about group by. It's a function that allows you to perform operations on data that are grouped based on a certain variable. For example, if you compute the average percent of women surveyed in each location who use tobacco, you can group by location as we just did. So let's print this again. But if we want to compute the average percent of women surveyed in each year of the study who use tobacco, originally in R, similarly to before, we can create a new subset and then instead use year instead of location. So if we print this, we have the average tobacco use per year. And now in Dplyr, we can do something similar, but again, more simply, specifying H as our data set, grouping by year instead of location, and now summarizing the average tobacco use per year. And note we have the same result as before, that in 1999, the percentage of women who use tobacco on average were surveyed was 1.16.